In a small, windowless room, fluorescent lights shine coldly down on the concrete floor. 3 rifles have been loaded, aimed at a man strapped tightly to a metal chair in the corner of the room. No countdown, no warning bell, only suffocating silence. Then suddenly, the crack of gunfire. This isn't a scene from an old war movie. This is reality unfolding in the United States in 2025, where an execution method once thought to be obsolete is quietly making a comeback. Last Friday evening, South Carolina carried out the death sentence against Steven Bryant, 44 years old, by firing squad. This wasn't the first execution this year. In fact, this was the 5th time South Carolina executed a death row inmate this year. But what makes this case different isn't in the statistics, it's the method. While 27 states across America still maintain the death penalty, and 43 executions have been recorded since the beginning of 2025, South Carolina is the only state actively bringing back a method many thought only existed in history books: firing squad execution. Steven Bryant was no ordinary criminal. His record documents a string of brutal crimes in 2004, 3 lives taken in just 5 days. Not killing in anger or self-defense. These were calculated, cold, and unbelievably brutal cases. At the scene of one of the murders, police found words written in the victim's blood on the wall: "Catch me if you can." A taunting message, as if death were just a game. Bryant was sentenced to death for the murder of Willard Tesian, one of 3 victims. And after more than 2 decades sitting in a death row cell, he was given the choice of how to end his life. But why is an ancient method like firing squad being revived? Why would someone facing death voluntarily choose to be shot rather than lethal injection or the electric chair? Historically, firing squads were an execution method for traitorous soldiers or war criminals, a quick death on the battlefield. But by the 21st century, it became one of the few remaining options as states faced a crisis shortage of lethal injection drugs. Pharmaceutical companies refused to supply them, countries banned exports, and the justice system was forced to seek alternatives. And in the minds of death row inmates like Bryant, perhaps a bullet through the heart in a few seconds sounds less terrifying than lying on a table for half an hour waiting for chemicals to spread through the body. But does that mean it's more humane? Ted Clifford never thought he would be the one to witness a human being's death. As a reporter for The State in South Carolina, he'd been covering the death penalty system for nearly a year. But following case files and sitting in an execution chamber are 2 completely different things. South Carolina law allows 3 media representatives to attend each execution, 1 from a wire service, 1 broadcaster, and 1 print reporter. The State Press Association runs a system like a lottery, with slight priority given to local newspapers. Ted submitted his name, and 3 weeks before the execution date, he received an email notification. He had been selected. This would be the 7th time he'd reported on an execution, but the first time he would have to see it with his own eyes. Friday afternoon, 3 p.m. Ted arrived at the South Carolina Department of Corrections Recruitment Center, the place used as a staging area for the media. The atmosphere was tense, but procedures followed strict protocol. After an hour and a half of waiting, they were led out back onto a Dodge minivan driven by a regional prison director, a woman who manages 6 different prisons. The convoy of 6 vehicles moved in a line, 2 escort vehicles, and 4 carrying witnesses. The Department of Corrections separated different groups. Victims' families didn't sit with defense attorneys, nor with law enforcement personnel. Everything was controlled down to the smallest detail. The convoy headed to Broad River Correctional Institution, the state's main prison, not far from downtown Columbia. But to get there, they had to travel a road more than 1.5 miles from the main highway, through lush green fields and sprawling pastures. The sun was setting. Flocks of geese were landing to rest for the night. Cows were grazing leisurely. The scene was beautiful, like a peaceful countryside painting, a terrifying contrast to what was about to happen. Ted looked out the window and felt something absurd, as if reality was being torn apart. The vehicle stopped at a training center on the prison grounds. They were taken into an office to wait. Ted knew the reason. They were waiting to see if the U.S. Supreme Court would issue a last-minute stay of execution, or whether Governor Henry McMaster, a former prosecutor known for supporting the death penalty, would grant clemency. The answer was no. While waiting, Ted and the other reporters were searched with frightening thoroughness. No watches, no wallets, no keys. Even the pen and paper they used were specially issued. The Department of Corrections didn't stop them from taking notes, but they were seriously strict to the point of harshness about bringing nothing in, taking nothing out of the death chamber. Finally, they boarded the vehicle again and traveled the final half-mile to the execution chamber, a building separate from the main prison complex. 3 layers of barbed wire fencing covered in razor wire surrounded the compound. The Department of Corrections Special Response Team, an elite unit that handled riots and transported dangerous inmates, patrolled strictly everywhere. When the vehicle stopped, a staff member issued a clear order. From here on, no one is allowed to speak. And truly, from that moment, not a word was spoken. Ted stepped out of the vehicle. The building door opened. Turn right, turn left, and suddenly he was in the room. It was now 5:58 p.m., 2 minutes until 6 o'clock. No time to prepare mentally, no time to be afraid. He sat down in his seat, looked at the burgundy curtain covering the bulletproof glass window with bars, and waited. At exactly 6:01 p.m., the curtain slid open without warning. Steven Bryant was already there, sitting on a metal chair in the left corner of the room. He wore an all-black outfit, different from the prison's standard green uniform. His hands were bound behind him, wearing black gloves, black plastic sandals. His face was visible, but his head was fixed by a wide cloth strap wrapped around his neck and chin, keeping his head pressed against the back of the chair. The strap pushed his cheeks up, distorting his face to the point that even though Ted had seen Bryant's image many times, he could barely recognize him. Bryant glanced toward the witnesses for a brief second when the curtain opened, then looked straight ahead. Didn't say anything. Didn't look at anyone, eyes empty, as if trying to separate himself from the reality unfolding. On his left chest, a square white piece of paper the size of a sticky note. In the center was a red circle, a target, a bullseye. In front of Bryant, on the right wall, a black curtain concealed 3 openings in the wall, 3 gun ports where 3 rifles were aimed at his heart. In the room, the family of victim Willard Teschen sat in the front row, holding hands tightly. Lawyers sat in silence. Ted and the other reporters took notes constantly. No one breathed audibly. 2 Department of Corrections officials stepped forward to announce that the death sentence against Steven Corey Bryant for murder would be carried out. No stay, no clemency. One of the 2 pulled up the black curtain, revealing 3 dark openings in the wall. No one could see the 3 volunteer shooters standing behind, but everyone knew they were there. A black hood was placed over Bryant's head. The moment the fabric touched his face, his breathing changed faster, shallower, as if trying to stay calm, but his body betrayed him. Short breaths, almost panting, then he forced himself to stop. The room sank into absolute silence. Ted fixed his eyes on the white and red target on Bryant's chest. 1 minute passed like an hour. And then, at 6:02 p.m., no countdown, no signal, gunfire. Not the sound of a door slamming, not a distant explosion. It was rifle fire roaring right next to your ear. 3 .308 Winchester Tap urban bullets, rounds designed to penetrate then fragment inside the body, tore through Bryant's chest simultaneously. The target patch flew off his chest, sailed across the room, landed on the floor behind the electric chair still placed in the center of the room, covered with a black cloth like a relic of the past. Bryant's body jerked violently, a reflexive jolt, violent, then slowing. For the next 30 seconds, small movements, possibly final breaths, possibly just unconscious muscle spasms, a slight jerk in the shoulder, then completely still. His body remained upright because it was strapped tight, but something changed, a limpness, an absence of life. On the black outfit, a dark wet streak began spreading slowly from the chest area. Blood. But no one saw the actual wound. That was exactly the purpose of the black outfit. At 6:04 p.m., someone wearing a white blouse entered, probably a doctor. The person placed a stethoscope on multiple positions on Bryant's chest, moving slowly, checking for any remaining heartbeat. A minute passed, then the person nodded and stepped out. At 6:05 p.m., the Department of Corrections official announced, The sentence has been carried out. Steven Bryant is pronounced dead at 6:05 p.m. The curtain closed. 7 minutes. From when the curtain opened to when it closed, only 7 minutes. Compared to lethal injection, which usually takes 20 to 30 minutes with long, painful breaths, this was a quick death. But does a quick death mean humane? Or is it just violence shortened in time? South Carolina isn't the only state turning back to firing squads. Across America, a silent but clear trend is forming. Idaho, Utah, Mississippi, and Oklahoma all have introduced firing squad into law as an alternative or even primary method. And the reason isn't mercy or legal progress, but a simple crisis: shortage of lethal injection drugs. In 2024, at Idaho State Prison, Thomas Creech, a 73-year-old death row inmate, lay on the execution table for nearly an hour. The medical team tried to insert the needle into 8 different locations on the old man's body. 8 failures. His veins were too old, too collapsed, unable to withstand the needle. Finally, they had to cancel. Creech survived, but not through clemency, only because his body refused to cooperate with death. This incident forced Idaho to act. In 2025, the state passed a law making firing squad the official execution method, effective July 2026. Idaho will become the only state in America where firing squad isn't a backup option, but the first choice. Utah was the last state to use firing squad before South Carolina in 2010 with Ronnie Lee Gardner, a 49-year-old murderer who voluntarily chose to be shot. But afterward, Gardner's brother became a national activist against this method, calling it barbaric and a medieval relic. Currently, Utah still holds Ralph Menzies, the state's longest-serving death row inmate, 67 years old, convicted of murder 40 years ago when he was 27. Now, suffering from dementia, but still awaiting execution day. The state Supreme Court stayed his execution last December, but no one knows how much longer he'll have to face 3 rifles. Legally, the 8th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution strictly prohibits cruel and unusual punishment. But the Supreme Court has never banned any specific execution method, including firing squad. In fact, some criminal experts and historians argue that firing squad is actually more humane than lethal injection. It's faster, more accurate, less prone to malfunction. But does that explain the case of McCall Mahi, a 42-year-old death row inmate executed in South Carolina last April? The autopsy report showed only 2 bullet wounds on his chest, and they missed his heart. Mahi reportedly cried out in pain after being shot, and it took several minutes for him to die. His lawyers accused this of being a botched execution, cruel punishment because it caused prolonged suffering. But the South Carolina Department of Corrections denied this, claiming the 2 bullets went through the same hole, an argument many found unconvincing. Ted Clifford left the execution chamber in silence. He couldn't forget Steven Bryant's distorted face, couldn't forget the white and red target on the black outfit, couldn't forget the blood spreading slowly. He'd witnessed many trials, many cases, many victims and broken families. But this was the first time he saw the final part of the justice system, where justice and revenge become hard to distinguish. The system tries to make it look clean, but in the end, it's still shooting a human being dead in a small room. And does that make it less brutal? The answer still hangs there, suspended in the cold air of the death chamber.